Imagine a storm so relentless it never stopped. Not for a day, not for a year, but for 2 million years straight. Rivers became oceans, deserts drowned, and survival was almost impossible. This is not a myth. It is the story of Earth's strangest flood, the rain that never ended. Long before humans, even before the dinosaurs we know, the world faced a catastrophe that defies belief. It wasn't caused by a meteor. It wasn't just a single volcanic blast. It was the sky itself, opening and unleashing water without pause. Scientists call it the Carnian pluvial event, but you can think of it simply as the Great Endless Storm. For over 2 million years, Earth was trapped under black skies, hammered by endless rain that reshaped the planet forever. But why did it happen? And how did fragile life survive a planet determined to wash everything away? To understand, we must go back to Pangaea, the giant supercontinent that existed 250 million years ago. All the world's land was fused into one enormous mass, surrounded by a single vast ocean. For millions of years, Pangaea was a land of extremes: bone-dry deserts, blistering heat, survival reserved for the toughest reptiles and plants. But beneath the crust, pressure was building. Volcanoes ripped open the land, spewing ash and greenhouse gases, choking the atmosphere with poison. And then the heavens broke. The first drops fell, not as relief, but as the beginning of a storm that would never stop. Imagine rain so heavy it drowned deserts into swamps. Rivers burst their banks, forests collapsed, and soil washed into the rising seas. For life on land, every day became a desperate fight not to be swept away. Entire species vanished. Others clung to shrinking patches of high ground. The rain was not a gift. It was extinction, falling drop by drop. Yet strangely, not everything perished. Some creatures adapted. Tiny ancestors of dinosaurs found opportunity in the chaos. Amphibians thrived in the new wetlands. Insects swarmed in the endless humidity. Plants evolved to survive in the saturated world, spreading across the drowned continent. The storm was destruction, but it was also creation, a crucible forging the rulers of the next era. Still, the storm had a darker side. Climate chaos spiraled out of control. Entire ecosystems collapsed. Half of Earth's species were wiped away. For 2 million years, the skies poured without mercy, resetting the balance of life. And when at last the rain slowed, Earth was reborn. Deserts had turned into forests, valleys into lakes. And in this transformed world, the stage was set for the dinosaurs to rise as the new masters. This was only the beginning. The storm gave them a chance, but what came next would decide whether they could truly rule the Earth. The world after the endless storm was unrecognizable. Where there had once been deserts stretching for thousands of miles, there were now lush forests teeming with new life. Rivers carved through the land, swamps spread across low valleys, and the supercontinent Pangaea breathed under a new rhythm. But while the rains had given life to some, they had destroyed others. This was no simple flood. It was a mass extinction in disguise. Amphibians, once rulers of the swamps, struggled in the new conditions. Their soft eggs laid in shallow pools were easily washed away by the floods. Entire lineages disappeared in silence. Yet reptiles with their hard-shelled eggs and scaly skin were ready for this new world. They did not need the swamp to reproduce. They could push deeper inland, higher onto rocky cliffs, and farther into new environments. The endless rain had turned the balance. The amphibians were fading, and the reptiles were rising. And among these early reptiles were tiny, almost fragile-looking creatures that would change everything: the ancestors of the dinosaurs. At first, they were nothing impressive. They were small, quick-footed hunters, living in the shadows of larger, more dominant reptiles. But in a world reshaped by chaos, smallness was an advantage. They could adapt. They could thrive where larger animals failed. The endless storms had transformed the land, but they had also transformed the skies. Thick clouds carried ash and gas from distant volcanoes, darkening the sun for years at a time. Temperatures swung wildly, scorching one decade, freezing the next. Species that could not adjust vanished. Those that survived became tougher, more flexible, and more innovative. The stage was being cleared not by choice, but by necessity. Imagine standing on the edge of a flooded valley. All around you are the remains of a drowned forest, blackened stumps jutting from the water. The ground trembles as distant volcanic eruptions roar in the background. The air is humid, heavy, filled with the buzzing of insects. And through the underbrush, a small reptile darts past, a creature no bigger than a dog, quick, alert, eyes shining with hunger. This is not yet a dinosaur, but it is the spark. Over time, that spark would catch. The small survivors of the storm would evolve into predators and herbivores, unlike anything seen before. The Great Endless Storm had done more than devastate the world. It had cleared the competition, created new landscapes, and handed the reptiles, and eventually the dinosaurs, the opportunity of a lifetime. And so, from the ruins of 2 million years of rain, the first dynasty of dinosaurs began to rise. They were not yet the towering titans we imagine today, but their time was coming. And the world they would inherit was one forged by storms, chaos, and survival. The rains had ended, but the scars they left behind reshaped the earth forever. Pangaea, the single supercontinent, was no longer the barren wasteland it once had been. Forests sprawled across regions that had once been dry deserts. Swamps and rivers cut deep into the land, dividing territories, creating new habitats. Life surged into every corner. And among that life, dinosaurs began to take their first confident steps into dominance. At first, they were still modest, dog-sized hunters darting through the ferns, nimble plant eaters grazing in herds no larger than a flock of birds. But what they lacked in size, they made up for in resilience. Their lungs were efficient, their limbs were built for speed, and their eggs were safe in dry environments where amphibians could not survive. Slowly, quietly, they expanded their range. The competition was fierce. They were not alone in this new world. Massive crocodile-like reptiles, armored herbivores, and strange predators all claimed their share of the reborn ecosystems. But the dinosaurs had an edge. They grew quickly, they adapted rapidly, and where others faltered, they endured. Imagine the floodplains of this reborn world. Herds of early herbivorous dinosaurs move cautiously through the thick greenery. Their predators, slim, fast, and lethal, lurk in the shadows. Overhead, pterosaurs, the first true masters of the skies, glide silently, scanning for carrion or small prey. Every corner of the land is alive with tension, a fragile balance of survival and death. It was during this time that dinosaurs began to experiment with size. Some grew taller, stretching their necks to reach new food sources. Others became bulkier, forming herds for safety. And the predators that hunted them followed suit, becoming larger, stronger, and smarter. The arms race had begun, but the Earth itself was restless. Volcanic activity still rattled the continent. Ashes still fell from the skies. Temperatures swung, climates shifted, and once again species were tested by forces far beyond their control. Each change wiped out some and hardened others. And with every upheaval, dinosaurs were among the survivors. They were not just evolving to live in this new world, they were evolving to master it. The storm had given them a chance. Now the shifting Earth was giving them power. Soon their small, fragile ancestors would give rise to giants, towering creatures that would dominate the land for over 150 million years. But in this moment, in the wake of endless rain and chaos, the dinosaurs were still only shadows of what they would one day become. The age of monsters was ending. The age of titans was about to begin. From the wreckage of storms and floods, something extraordinary began to emerge. Dinosaurs were no longer just small, fast survivors. They were evolving into giants. For the first time in Earth's history, land animals reached sizes that seemed impossible. These were the first sauropods, the long-necked herbivores that would one day become the largest creatures ever to walk the Earth. Picture a landscape where dense forests give way to open floodplains. Rising above the ferns, a herd of sauropods stretches across the horizon. Their necks sweep through the canopy like cranes, stripping leaves from branches 20 feet above the ground. Their tails stretch out behind them like living whips, keeping predators at bay. Each step shakes the earth, leaving footprints that will harden into stone for us to discover millions of years later. These giants were not alone. Predators evolved alongside them, growing larger and stronger to meet the challenge. Sleek carnivores prowled the edges of herds, waiting for the moment a juvenile strayed too far. Their teeth, sharp and serrated, tore through flesh with terrifying efficiency. It was a dangerous world, an arms race written into muscle, bone, and blood. But the dinosaurs had more than size on their side. They had adaptability. Some became high browsers, reaching food no other creature could touch. Others grazed closer to the ground, forming diverse communities that could share the same space without competing directly. This flexibility allowed them to spread across Pangaea, colonizing every environment the storms had left behind. And the Earth itself continued to shape their destiny. Volcanoes still rumbled, releasing gases that shifted climates. Oceans crept inland, drowning lowlands and isolating populations. Each change forced evolution to act, and each trial sculpted dinosaurs into something more formidable. By now, the reign of amphibians was over. The giant insects of the Carboniferous and Permian were fading, suffocated by declining oxygen. Crocodile-like reptiles still held power in rivers and swamps. But on land, dinosaurs were rising with unstoppable momentum. They were no longer fragile survivors. They were becoming the architects of the future. The age of giants had begun, and with it, the blueprint for domination that would last more than 150 million years. As the land filled with giants, the skies began to change too. For millions of years, the air had been the domain of insects, buzzing, clicking, whirring in endless swarms. But now a new kind of flyer was preparing to take off. The first pterosaurs stretched their wings in the late Triassic skies. Their bones were hollow, their bodies light, their wings vast membranes of skin supported by an elongated finger. With each leap into the air, they were rewriting what life could do. No longer were the skies ruled by dragonflies the size of seagulls. Now vertebrates had taken flight. Imagine standing on the shore of a Triassic lagoon. The air is heavy with heat, the sky glowing red with volcanic haze. Suddenly a shadow passes over you. A pterosaur glides above, wings wide as a small plane. Its beak snaps down, seizing a fish from the surface in a single strike, before it soars upward again, vanishing into the clouds. For the first time, the skies were no longer safe havens. They were hunting grounds. And beneath those skies, the seas themselves were stirring. Reptiles had returned to the water, but they were no longer timid amphibians clinging to swamps. They had become full-scale predators, sleek and terrifying. Early ichthyosaurs swam like dolphins, with streamlined bodies built for speed. Others, like the massive pliosaurs that would come later, were engines of raw power, with jaws that could crush bones in an instant. The oceans had always been dangerous, but now they were evolving into battlefields where reptiles, not fish, reigned supreme. Imagine schools of early fish scattering as a reptile, the length of a bus, darts through the water with astonishing grace. For creatures of the seas, survival was no easier than it was on land. Everywhere you looked, land, sea, or sky, the world was reshaping itself into a theater of monsters. Dinosaurs ruled the floodplains. Pterosaurs claimed the air. And in the oceans, reptilian hunters turned the waters into killing zones. This was no longer just recovery from disaster. This was escalation. Life was not settling back into balance. It was accelerating into extremes, and the planet seemed determined to test how far evolution could go. As millions of years passed, the world entered the Jurassic period, and with it, the true golden age of dinosaurs began. The forests grew taller, the climate warmed, and rivers carved fertile valleys that stretched across entire continents. It was in these lush landscapes that dinosaurs transformed from survivors into rulers. They began to split into astonishingly different forms, each adapted to dominate its own niche. Some grew taller than any living animal today. Giants like Brachiosaurus, their necks towering above the treetops, plucking leaves that no other creature could reach. Others became terrifying hunters, perfecting speed, strength, and cunning. Allosaurus stalked the plains, its jaws lined with teeth designed for tearing flesh. its every step balanced and deliberate. But it wasn't just size that set them apart. Dinosaurs were innovating. Some walked on two legs, freeing their arms for slashing claws. Others developed massive herds, moving across the land in great migrations, their sheer numbers a strategy for survival. The diversity of their shapes and strategies was unlike anything Earth had seen before. And while the land was theirs, the skies above were filled with pterosaurs soaring over valleys and oceans. Imagine the horizon alive with wings, hundreds of gliding hunters scanning the ground below for prey. The world was layered with predators, jaws in the rivers, claws on the plains, wings in the skies. Nowhere was untouched. For the smaller creatures of this age, life was a constant gamble. Mammals had already appeared, but they were no larger than shrews or rats, scurrying in the shadows. At night, while the thunder of giant footsteps shook the ground, these tiny mammals crept silently through the underbrush, stealing insects, hiding from the gaze of predators, and waiting, quietly, for their moment in history. This was the true rise of the dinosaurs. Not just creatures that existed, but creatures that shaped every corner of Earth's ecosystems. They had become the architects of life, forcing everything else to adapt around them. But as the Jurassic Age thundered forward, something even more extraordinary was on the horizon. These rulers of the land were about to face new challenges, new rivals, and new catastrophes that would test even their dominance. By the middle of the Jurassic, the Age of Giants had reached its peak. The land shook beneath the footsteps of sauropods, creatures so massive they seemed less like animals and more like moving mountains. Diplodocus, stretching nearly the length of a modern airplane, swept its tail like a living whip across the plains. Brachiosaurs lifted their heads into the clouds, feeding on the tallest trees. These were the architects of the forests, reshaping the land as they moved, stripping foliage and carving pathways through dense vegetation. And where there are giants, there must also be predators. Enter the apex hunters of their time, Allosaurus and its kin. Unlike the bulky plant eaters, these carnivores were fast, balanced, and relentless. Imagine standing in their shadow, jaws opening wide enough to crush bones, their eyes fixed with a cold intelligence honed by millions of years of survival. They were not mindless monsters, they were specialists, pack hunters capable of bringing down prey many times their size. But dominance was not just about size and power. Dinosaurs were also innovating in ways that would change the world forever. Fossil evidence suggests that some species may have begun to develop primitive feathers, not for flight, but for insulation, display, and perhaps even communication. These strange, colorful adornments gave rise to new forms of behavior, mating rituals, territorial displays, and survival strategies unlike anything that had come before. Meanwhile, pterosaurs ruled the skies, evolving into larger and more complex forms. With wingspans wider than a car, they glided effortlessly above oceans and rivers, swooping down to snatch fish with precision. Imagine entire cliffs alive with them, nests built on the edges, hatchlings learning to fly, the air alive with the beating of wings, and in the shadows the small mammals still endured. They lived in burrows, scurried at night, and avoided confrontation with the titans above. Their story was not yet one of dominance, but of patience. They were observers, survivors, and one day, inheritors of the earth. The Jurassic was a time of balance between overwhelming size and relentless adaptation. The stage was crowded with creatures more varied and more bizarre than any fantasy could conjure. Yet even in this age of abundance, Earth was not finished rewriting the rules. Because beyond the horizon of time lay the Cretaceous, a period that would push dinosaurs to their ultimate extremes. The Jurassic Age had given rise to giants, but the Cretaceous would take everything to the next level. This was a world of innovation, of extremes, and of some of the strangest creatures ever to walk, swim, or fly across the Earth. By now, the continents of Pangaea had begun to crack and drift apart. Oceans cut deeper into the land, separating ecosystems and isolating species. Isolation is the fuel of evolution, and it drove life into new and bizarre directions. Dinosaurs became more specialized, more diverse, and in some cases, more terrifying than ever before. The plant world was transforming too. Flowering plants appeared for the very first time, their bright colors and sweet nectar creating entirely new relationships between plants and animals. Insects adapted, learning to spread pollen, and in return, they were rewarded with food. For the first time, Earth's landscapes began to bloom with the kinds of flowers we still see today. This single shift reshaped ecosystems forever, and dinosaurs were quick to take advantage of the abundance. Among the plant eaters, herds grew larger and more complex. Some evolved armor, thick plates and spikes that turned them into living fortresses. Ankylosaurs, low to the ground and shielded like tanks, carried clubs at the end of their tails that could break the legs of predators. Others turned to speed and agility, darting through forests in groups, relying on numbers and coordination to outwit hunters. And the hunters were evolving too. Sleek raptors, smaller but highly intelligent, began to appear. With sharp, sickle-shaped claws and evidence of pack behavior, they were a new kind of threat, deadly not for their size but for their strategy. Larger predators also rose, some rivaling the power of the Jurassic allosaurs but refined for new prey and new climates. Meanwhile, the skies were no longer just ruled by pterosaurs. Birds, descended from feathered dinosaurs, began to appear. Though still primitive, they were taking their first steps into a future that would one day outlast even the mightiest reptiles. The air was alive with competition, wings of leather and wings of feather battling for dominance of the skies, and beneath the waves the seas churned with monsters of their own. Massive marine reptiles prowled the oceans, while schools of new fish species spread across the globe. The oceans of the Cretaceous were every bit as dangerous as the land above. The Cretaceous was not just another chapter in Earth's story, it was a turning point, a time when dinosaurs reached their most diverse and spectacular forms, when flowers painted the world, and when life itself seemed to explode into endless variation. But with every rise comes a fall, and even as dinosaurs spread into every corner of the globe, forces beyond their control were already moving into place, forces that would end their reign in fire. By the middle of the Cretaceous, the world was alive with power and spectacle. Dinosaurs had claimed every corner of the land, and their diversity had exploded into forms more dramatic than anything the Jurassic had produced. This was the true peak of their reign. On the plains roamed massive herds of Triceratops relatives, horned dinosaurs with great shields of bone protecting their necks and sharp horns jutting from their faces. Imagine a sea of these animals moving across the grasslands, their combined weight shaking the earth, their horns ready to drive back even the most fearsome predator. They were living tanks, proof that defense could be just as formidable as attack. And predators had risen to meet them. In the northern continents, the ancestors of Tyrannosaurus were beginning to appear. At first, they were not the towering monsters of legend, but mid-sized hunters, already honing the traits that would one day make them supreme. Their jaws grew stronger, their teeth thicker, their senses sharper. They were being sculpted, step by step, into the most iconic predator Earth would ever know. The seas, too, were undergoing their own revolution. With the ichthyosaurs fading, new monsters emerged. Mosasaurs, massive marine reptiles related to snakes and lizards, began to dominate the oceans. Imagine a predator longer than a bus, its double-hinged jaws snapping shut on prey with terrifying precision. Sharks swam in these waters, but even they gave way to the power of the mosasaurs. For any creature unlucky enough to be caught in their path, the ocean was a death trap. Above it all, the skies were filled with giants. Pterosaurs had reached incredible sizes, wingspans stretching longer than small planes. They soared across continents, scanning for prey, scavenging carcasses, and ruling the air with unmatched dominance. Birds, their smaller feathered cousins, were also rising, but they were still overshadowed by these leathery winged giants. The Cretaceous was a world of balance through escalation. Herbivores became fortresses, predators became weapons, oceans bred leviathans, and skies filled with giants. Life was locked in an endless arms race, and the result was a planet more alive, more dangerous, and more spectacular than ever before. But even in this age of abundance, cracks were beginning to form. Volcanoes rumbled, seas rose and fell, and on the far side of the solar system, a rock was hurtling toward Earth, destined to end this magnificent reign in a single catastrophic moment. By the late Cretaceous, the dinosaurs had reached their highest glory. Towering herds of armored giants and horned beasts filled the land, while massive predators stalked the plains. But among all the hunters that walked the earth, one lineage was rising to become the ultimate symbol of power: the tyrannosaurs. At first, they were not the colossal monsters of popular imagination. They began as modest predators, sleek and agile, hunting in packs and targeting smaller prey. Yet over millions of years, they grew larger, stronger, and far more dangerous. Their skulls thickened, their teeth grew like knives of steel, and their jaws evolved into crushing machines. The tyrannosaurs were sculpted by evolution into apex killers, perfected for domination. And then came Tyrannosaurus rex. Over 40 feet long, weighing more than 7 tons, its very presence terrified everything around it. With a single bite, it could deliver a force strong enough to shatter bone. It was not simply a hunter, it was an executioner, a living engine of destruction at the very peak of the dinosaur age. But the Cretaceous was not only the age of tyrants. Triceratops, with its great horns and shielded frill, roamed in vast herds, forming walls of defense against predators. Ankylosaurs, armored head to tail, swung their massive club tails like living wrecking balls. Hadrosaurs, the duck-billed dinosaurs, filled the valleys, grazing in numbers so great they shook the land. The balance of predator and prey created one of the richest ecosystems Earth has ever known. Meanwhile, in the seas, mosasaurs reigned supreme, their vast bodies slicing through the water as they devoured anything in their path. Giant turtles and massive sharks shared these oceans, but none could rival the terror of the mosasaur. Overhead, the skies were still ruled by pterosaurs, creatures so immense that their wings stretched wider than the length of a bus. The late Cretaceous was Earth's masterpiece, the peak of prehistoric life. Every continent throbbed with energy, with creatures of staggering size and diversity, locked in the eternal struggle for survival. It was a golden age, a world so full of life that it seemed unstoppable. And yet, even as dinosaurs thundered across the plains and pterosaurs darkened the skies, their time was running out. The Earth itself was restless and far beyond the atmosphere. An unstoppable force was drawing closer. The age of giants was about to end, not with a slow decline, but in fire, chaos, and darkness. The late Cretaceous was a world in full bloom. Dinosaurs ruled with unmatched power, oceans swarmed with leviathans, and the skies were alive with wings. It was an age of dominance, of abundance, and of balance that seemed unshakable. Yet the end was already written in the silence of space. 66 million years ago, Earth was thriving. Vast herds of Triceratops roamed the floodplains. Hadrosaurs grazed in valleys that stretched for miles. Armored ankylosaurs plodded slowly across the forests, while predators like Tyrannosaurus rex patrolled with unchallenged supremacy. It was a golden age that had taken millions of years to build. But beneath this thriving surface, the Earth itself was restless. Volcanoes in what is now India spewed toxic gases into the skies, clouding the atmosphere and disturbing the climate. Seasons became harsher, weather less predictable. Some species struggled while others adapted, but none could have foreseen the true catastrophe that loomed just beyond the stars. Far away, a rock larger than Mount Everest had broken free from its orbit and was drifting through space. For millions of years, it wandered silently, aimless and unseen. But its trajectory had locked onto Earth, and nothing could stop it. Imagine the last days. Dinosaurs still thundered across the plains, unaware. Pterosaurs glided in the skies, searching for fish in the rivers below. In the oceans, mosasaurs ruled with iron jaws, utterly confident in their mastery. None of them could know that in a heartbeat, everything would change. As the asteroid hurtled closer, the planet remained alive with sound and motion. The forests were thick with insect calls, the plains with the bellows of herbivores, the coasts with the crashing of waves. It was life at its greatest height, life on the edge of annihilation. And then one morning, the sky lit with fire.